Welcome to Bloor Central, friends. This is Sunday Word, our online edition of Sunday Word for October 30th. As I say every week, we would much prefer to have you join us for our live edition, Sunday mornings here at Bloor Central. However, we know that some people are still dealing with all kinds of health issues, and there are other issues as well that come up, which make it impossible for people to join us on Sunday morning. But particularly now, as we're going through the Beatitudes, as we're trying to lay this foundation for what Bloor Central life will be about, we really are trying to make sure that people keep up with the teaching, even if they can't be here. And that's why we provide these online Bible lessons, so that even if you miss out, you're at least not going to fall behind with the Bible teaching. I'll tell you, we've had a rough few weeks here at Bloor Central with sickness around the staff and people getting COVID, getting the flu, all kinds of different issues going on. But it kind of feels like we're limping through from one week to the next. But I'll tell you, God has been showing up in powerful, powerful ways. We're getting some incredible testimonies and just having some wonderful ministry opportunities together. Saturday night, we get together for our community meal between 4 and 6. We'd love to have you come and join us for that. Then on Sunday, we get together at 10 a.m. Even though we feel like we've been limping along, God has not been thrown off by any of this, and we're really excited about all the things that God is doing at Bloor Central. And again, we're looking forward to again this week, this Sunday morning at Sunday Word. I want to jump right into the teaching this week. I really do. I've got a lot to speak about. We have been going through all of the Beatitudes from Matthew chapter 5. Last week, we introduced, it's actually the fourth of the Beatitudes. First of all, we looked through what it was to be broken, then what it was to be blessed. Then we did blessed are the poor in spirit. Then we did blessed are those who mourn. Then we did blessed are the meek. Last week, we did blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. We are actually making that a two-parter. I'm doing the second part of that Beatitude this morning. However, in order to kind of illustrate the principle that Jesus speaks about in Matthew chapter 5, I want to refer to a parable that Jesus told in Luke chapter 11. I'm going to be reading from Luke 15. I'm going to be reading Luke 15, verse 11 through to 32. Follow along with me. I'm reading from the New International Version. It says this: Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to the father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard the music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, 'What's going on?' 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, You kill the fattened calf for him? My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we have to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and now is found. One of the difficulties we have when we are offering this kind of long-term series, as we have been doing with Beatitudes, is that the review gets longer and longer each week. This is the 7th week that we've been teaching on this passage. As I said earlier, we started with what it was to be broken, what it was to be blessed. Then we did, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek. Last week we did, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. You know, as we try to review all these, the package gets bigger and bigger, and it gets more and more difficult. We really have to be placing more and more responsibility on you. We are really depending on you to be paying attention to these messages. Make sure that you're keeping up with them on the video. Do your very best to be here in person so that you can even participate in the discussions that we have here at 789 Dovercourt on Sunday morning. More than that, though, we also depend on you taking the notes and reviewing them, even memorizing the passage of Scripture, Matthew 5, 3 through 10. We had someone read that or recite it last week who had memorized it. Also, we've been providing pictures each week that give our imagination some kind of inspiration, we hope, to really be thinking about how important these verses are. And not only how important they are for us individually, but how important they are for us as a people. At Bloor Central, we want to be really focusing who we are. We are a people that are committed to moving from brokenness into blessing. And there's no better passage of Scripture than this one that Jesus offers us in the Beatitudes. And so really encourage you over these weeks to be making every effort to prepare and to really allow the lessons of this passage to sink deep into who we are as individuals and as a people. Now, after saying that, I do feel I have to review last week a little bit because we're actually continuing it. It says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled. What I said last week is that this beatitude gives our lives structure. It's a statement saying we're going to move forward now. We're moving out so that now we have a goal for our lives. We have a destination. Is we're going to commit our lives to seeking righteousness. It really is. That's the destination, but more than a destination, it's a journey. And in actual fact, there's all kinds of ways we can imagine this. But as we think about a life that is seeking righteousness, the journey in many ways is the destination. Like we're heading towards a goal, like the CN Tower, where we can, as we weave our way through the streets, we can find ourselves closer and closer to the destination. And there's all kinds of detours and dead ends that we might find along the way. But so long as we keep our eyes on where we're headed, we can, turn around, we can get reorientated and make progress to where we're actually trying to get to. Jesus has pointed us as this kind of life that if we make it our goal to be seeking the righteousness of God, to live in a right relationship with Him, and if we keep on that path, the promise is we will be satisfied. Our life is given this sense of order in which we can feel things are under control. We can have a real sense of security, and we can have a satisfaction, a sense of purpose as we really know where our life is going. It's a very simple principle. Stay on that path, seek righteousness with God, and your life will be filled with satisfaction. But many people turn down the opportunity to follow that path. We know that many times, as we discussed last week, people are not interested in something that's going to take so long, and it's going to require patience and perseverance. Quite often, it's easier to just settle for what we would call a counterfeit God, some kind of value or object or behavior that offers us a quick fix, some kind of instant gratification. And so we participate, we join ourselves, we connect ourselves with those behaviors which in actual fact distract us from seeking righteousness. And we enjoy maybe some sort of quick, instant gratification, but we know that there's no lasting satisfaction. We know that quite often those kind of what we refer to as counterfeit gods, they lead to, a life that is unfulfilled and is filled with frustration and hopelessness. So last week we were trying to identify what are those things, those behaviors, those values that we connect to, and they really distract us from pursuing a right relationship with God. For some, it's very easy for us to identify those. We have friends in our fellowship who have had an addiction to drugs or alcohol, and they know that attachment to drugs and alcohol is destroying their lives. So they know right away, hey, I need to break my attachment with the drugs and the alcohol if I'm going to seek a right relationship with God. But for some of us, maybe the attachments we have, maybe the addictions that we have are not so obvious. They're not so, out in the open. And yet many times they can be just as distracting, just as destructive in keeping us back from a right relationship with God. For example, with me, I know that I haven't got an addiction to any drugs or alcohol. However, there are behaviors in my life, there are things that I connect myself to that I know can be distracting in my pursuit of righteousness. So this week I was trying to spend some time thinking about, what are some things that I could really identify that are distracting me. So, one thing that I've become aware of just this week as I was thinking about it, through COVID, we had so much spare time, and, we got this new TV box that gives us more television than I could watch in 10 lifetimes. And on this, I have an opportunity to watch Law and Order. Karen and I never lived in North America when that was a show that was on. I've seen it a few times and I kind of enjoy it. It's got interesting characters, interesting moral twists and all kinds of questions, a little bit of a story. So I've enjoyed it. And over COVID, I found a place where I can watch it literally on demand. I don't even have to watch it with commercials. So it only takes me 45 minutes. And during COVID, there wasn't much more else. Sometimes, there wasn't much to do. We couldn't go out, so we'd watch some of Law and Order together. Well, now that the isolation of COVID is over, I know we're still dealing with COVID, but the isolation is over. But I still find myself, I come home each night and I like to wind down a bit, and I've gotten the habit of just flicking on Law and Order and watching 45 minutes of a show. Almost, I would say 5, maybe even 6 times a week, I go down and I flick it on. And I just realized this week, that's something that I've attached myself. Now, is that 45 minutes a day? Is that gonna destroy my life? I don't think so. However, it is a distraction. I mean, that 45 minutes that I'm spending, that could be used in a more constructive way. I could take some extra time to be reading my Bible or in prayer, or there's many ways that I could use that time that would be more useful in my pursuit of righteousness. So this week I decided I'm going to fast from Law and Order. I'm not going to watch any more Law and Order for the rest of this year. That's just an example. That's what fasting is about, is to recognize an attachment we have in this world and get it under control so that we are loosening its grip on us. We're not allowing that, whatever we have attached ourselves to, we're not allowing it to control our lives. We're making more room for God in our lives. So that's what I'm going to try to do. One of the advantages of being a part of a church is now I've declared that to you. Now you can hold me accountable for that. I've made that commitment to you that for the rest of this year, I won't be doing that at night. I'm going to try to use that time to be more faithful in my pursuit of righteousness. And so you can hold me accountable for that. I encourage you to do that. So that's what last week we talked about. Yeah, how do we disconnect with those things that have distracted us from pursuing righteousness? And so this week we move on. We now want to talk about, okay, so we've got to disconnect from those things, but how do we actually connect? How do we actually pursue this righteousness? Now, there's 2 kind of important events that I believe each one of us have to go through if we want to pursue righteousness, and I want to discuss them with you this morning. The first of all is we have to come to a point where we experience clarity of thinking, where suddenly we understand something, where we start to think properly. We've spoken many times in the past few weeks about how our minds get distorted and how we start thinking things that really we spoke about brain damage. The world teaches us how to think. And so sometimes, we get really confused. But I want to speak to the first step in experiencing this pursuit of righteousness is a clarity of thinking. The second thing, which is just as important, is a spiritual enlightenment. Now, let me try to explain those a little bit as we go through the parable that Jesus shared with us that I read earlier. It really illustrates these two principles so very clearly. If we are seeking to, pursue, to hunger and thirst after righteousness, I would encourage you to consider these two events that have to take place in our life. First of all, if we just explore this story that Jesus told, there's this young man, and he's really got his life together. He's got a very well-ordered life. Everything's going well. He's got a family, he's got a home, he's got an inheritance that is waiting for him, and that inheritance represents security for his future. I mean, this guy has it all together, but he decides he wants to throw it all away to follow his self-centered passions. He just decides he's going to, allow the passions to control him. So he really humiliates his father and breaks his father's heart as he takes all of his inheritance. Basically, he says to his father, I wish you were dead. Give me the money now. I want to go have a good time. And so this young man takes this money from his father and he runs off and he wastes it all in running after his passions. And what ends up happening is it doesn't take long before he hits rock bottom. Everything is gone and he's literally starving to death. He's feeding pigs thinking, I wish I could have this food that the pigs are eating. Now, believe it or not, this experience is not the disaster it sounds like. There's something beautiful that comes out of this, because it's many times, and some of us know this quite clearly, that when we hit rock bottom, somehow in that experience, we begin to think more clearly. We actually our thinking sorts itself out. This guy has realized that all these things I've done, I've created I've created a life that is literally a living hell. And it's in that experience that suddenly it says in verse 17, he came to his senses. He finally realizes that the life that he's been trying to put together is a disaster. And so he intentionally walks away from the life that he had been trying to create. He walked away and says, I'm going back to my father. Now, there's a very interesting dynamic at work here, because yes, his thinking has cleared up. He realizes that everything he's done is just a disaster. So he intentionally walks away from it. He starts thinking clearly now, and he walks away from that. But as he's going there, he's still not had any enlightenment. Let me explain a little bit about what that means. As he's going along, he is assuming, justifiably, he's assuming that his father would never welcome him back as a son. His father's not going to welcome him back into the family because he's just hurt his father too much. He's been too disrespectful. And so what he does is he decides, well, look, my father's not going to accept me back as a son, but if I go to him, maybe he can hire me just as an employee. At least then I'll be getting fed. I can be one of his servants, kind of thing. And so this is something that is, a kind of a thing that you can imagine doing, that when you begin to think clearly, you think, oh, okay, I've got to come up with a plan now. I realized I made a mistake. Let me come up with a plan. And you can see that this young man has started to already devise a plan. And he said, I'm going to go up to my dad and I'm going to say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please make me like one of your servants. So he's making this plan up. Now, this often happens for those of us who have hit rock bottom and we realize this life that we're trying to put together is a disaster. We decide, hey, I'm going to turn back to God, and I know what I'll do. I'll come up with a plan for God to accept me. I'll bargain with God. Maybe I'll make some sort of deal so that God will accept me back. We are desperate to earn our way back, or so we kind of feel like we can negotiate with God on him accepting us back. This is not what we call the righteousness of God. This is what we call being self-righteous. In other words, we come up with a plan to sort our life out, and we're going to tell God how to work it out. We're going to tell God how it works. And if you can imagine, like I can see myself in this picture, in this story so very clearly. Have you ever rehearsed in your head what you're going to say to somebody when you see them? So you'll see there, let me just look up on the Bible verse there. You'll see, first of all, in verse 19, no, sorry, verse 19, he's rehearsing what he's going to say. Verse 18, he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. He rehearsed that in verse 18 and 19. Later on, when he greets his father, he actually starts offering the speech that he's prepared. In verse 21, he says, the son says to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Can you see that the young man he's rehearsed this? He's come up with this plan on how he's going to get his life right with God. But this is not the way that we find righteousness. And for many people, I've seen this happen, dozens of times. People who have recognized, hey, my life is going in a terrible direction. I've got to sort this out. They have a moment of clarity, but they have no spiritual enlightenment. What they decide is, hey, my life is going in a bad direction. I'm going to fix it. And this young man thought he had the formula for fixing it. Don't you remember the very first beatitude? We said, blessed are the poor in spirit. We recognize at the very beginning, we have to recognize that there's nothing in us that can fix the brokenness in our lives. There has to be an understanding that as we seek righteousness, we're not coming with our own plan. We have to really throw ourselves at the mercy of God. Look what happens here in this passage. Again, the son begins to speak in verse 21. He's got his speech all planned. He comes to the father. Sorry, let me just pull it back here. He comes to the father and says, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. I've sinned against heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father interrupts him. In verse 22, the father says, quick, bring a robe and put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. You see, all of this is symbolic. Recognize, the son thought he was going to come and be welcomed back as a servant. But you see, it's not us who tell God how to receive us. It's God who offers us open arms. That's what it says there. He ran to him and wrapped his arms around him. He kissed him. And then when the son started to try and bargain with him, he said, whoa, stop right there. Get a robe, get a ring, put sandals on his feet. All these are very heavily symbolic in the ancient world, saying, this is my son. This is a member of the family. He becomes a full-fledged member of the family just by coming back to me. When he turns back to me, this reception is going to be waiting for him. I'm going to wrap my arms around him and kiss him. We are going to throw a party. Understand this. This is undeserved. This young man doesn't deserve a party. He deserves to be forsaken. He deserves to be sent back to feed the pigs. He's really hurt the father terribly. He's humiliated him. And yet the father, as soon as the son turns back, the father wraps his arms around him and kisses him and says, my son is back and we're going to treat him like my son. Undeserved, unearned, and unconditional. That is the reception that is waiting for the son. And there is this party. It's such a powerful picture that the father throws this party for his son, and he's revealing that he longs for what is good for his son. This parable is revealing for us that God longs for what is best for us. This parable is a reminder that God longs for what is best for you. He wants to throw you a party. He wants us to just come back and just turn back to him. This is a beautiful picture of the way that God receives us. But we have to understand we can't come back to God bargaining. We can't come back to God trying to earn our way back. There has to be a sense in which we just allow God to put the robe on us, to put a ring on our fingers, sandals on our feet, and to recognize, wow, I'm back in the family. This is beautiful. Please understand, being back in the family has some responsibility. Okay, we'll deal with that later. But what I want to make really clear for us, if we want to seek the righteousness of God, we come back under God's terms. We don't make the terms. We don't decide. And it's in that moment. It's in that moment when the son is putting the cloak on and the ring and the sandals. His father's kissed him. They're going to prepare a party for him. It's in that moment he realizes, oh, I'm not setting the agenda here. I'm part of the family. Oh, this is spectacular stuff. It makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This is something really beautiful. It's something that all of us need to understand. But I do want to point out there's one unhappy person in this story. It's the older brother. And this is so bizarre, but so important for us at Bloor Central to understand. The older brother, he's done everything right. He's done nothing wrong. And yet he doesn't go into the party. He doesn't have anything to celebrate. You know, there's no moment of clarity for him. There's no spiritual enlightenment, because all that's happened to him is jealousy and bitterness have gotten a hold of his heart. He's decided that it's not right that someone should come back. He hasn't understood that the love the Father has for him isn't based on what he's done. It's based on who he is. This older brother, he thought he deserved a better treatment. This is a really inhospitable response. And it's a reminder to us as a church that as those who turn back to God, we need to be welcoming them with open arms. The older brother couldn't celebrate. He couldn't participate in the party because he didn't have the understanding. He couldn't think clearly. Now, I'm really sorry to say, so many times this is the response of the church. We get involved in our good works and our service, and suddenly we think that we deserve better. Suddenly we start imposing, conditions on those that want to turn back to God. And we say, no, you gotta dress right first, and you gotta do the right stuff. You gotta sing the right songs. You gotta, you've gotta do things right, and then we'll decide if you're welcome back. That is not the way that God has welcomed us. You see, it's only when we really understand that this love that God has for us is undeserved, is unearned, and is unconditional. It's only when you realize that the light goes on, that you begin to realize, wait a minute, it's not because of all this stuff. He just loves me. I really want to, I want you to understand, how important it is for us to receive this love for ourselves, to allow ourselves to become one of God's children, and to just stand back and go, wow. Simply receive this love that God has for you. It's as we do that we're entering into this pursuit of righteousness. Not trying to earn it, not trying to bargain for it. As we move closer to God, he welcomes us with open arms, and all we can do is receive it with wonder. And it's in this context when we finally realize that we don't deserve it. We deserve to be cast out. But when we are welcomed in such a beautiful way, an unconditional way from God, all the stuff that, God does to accept us back as his children, you begin to realize that God sets the terms for my righteousness. It's not me. And it's only as we receive that love that we can actually share it with others. We need to recognize that God loves us like this, not just for our own entrance into the party, but also so that we can share it with others. Recognizing the wonder of God's love so that we can offer that unconditional love to others. I was recently reading a story about a pastor who had a drug addict, and he was speaking to this drug addict about the love of God and how God loved him. And the addict responded, how am I supposed to believe that kind of love even exists when no one has ever loved me? That's a good question. That's a really good question. That's a question that should be driving us every Saturday night as we welcome the community into our meal, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to remind people that they've not been forgotten. We're trying to remind them that there is a God that loves them. And the way that we can communicate that is by treating them with dignity and treating them like they're important, because they are. Not because of what the world says. The world says they're not important, but God says they are. And so we want to welcome them with open arms. We want to welcome them and well, I don't want to kiss them necessarily, but we want to be giving them that sense of, hey, this is a place where you can belong. This is a place where we have a place for you to sit and enjoy a meal. We're going to treat you like you're important, because you are. And that might not be something we feel like doing, but what we've experienced that love. We've experienced that love from God ourselves. God has treated us that way. And so now as a part of the family, part of our responsibility, a big part of our responsibility, is to share that love, that unconditional, unearned, love that God has for us. We want to show it to someone else. Honestly, last weekend, I was telling you, it was just such a great experience for me. And I got to the point where I feel like, this is a great way to spend my life. This is a great way to be demonstrating the love of God, in a place like this. This is a great way, but I know that many people look at what I do and they think I'm crazy. Like, what are you doing this for? Unless you've experienced the love of God in your life, it doesn't make any sense for you to be treating people with that kind of love. It's only as you've received it. I really want to have you actually received the love that God has for you? Have you recognized that you don't deserve it? You've never earned it. You can't negotiate for it. It's not something that you plan. It's something that God has planned out for you. If you've recognized there's more to your life than you thought, I want to invite you to recognize that the God who has never given up on you wants to draw close. It's not just about clearing up our thinking. It's about surrendering ourselves to his love. The God who, when we turn our back on him, he welcomes us with open arms. We don't deserve it, and we can't earn it. But I want to invite you this morning to consider, how can you just allow yourself to receive that love this morning?